Jim, good to be here with you to talk a little bit about strategy and leadership.
Likewise, good to see you.
Yeah, so talking about the future of strategy and leadership and kind of where it's going, what are some of the key things that leaders need to be developing around skills to effectively be able to lead strategy?
Yeah, it's really changed over the years, and it's probably best to first identify where strategy comes from. Business strategy, corporate strategy is something that traditionally was kind of done on the side and once a year.
Yeah.
And it was like posted on a wall. This is our strategy and these are our objectives, and people would follow that through the year. And that was good for a while.
Yeah.
But then the world started changing on us. And most recently, what we've seen with disruption, with artificial intelligence, with even things like COVID, where suddenly everybody's at home. You can't just walk down the aisle and ask people how they're doing on Objective X. It's changed a lot. And so what we're seeing, the most effective firms have a much stronger integration between strategy and leadership and adaptability and flexibility. So there's some parts of strategy that you want to stay consistent with, but the actual execution and enactment of how to get there is much more democratized.
Yeah.
Everybody in the organization is a part of it. It's not just the brightest person who's a CEO who's telling everyone what task to do.
Yeah.
So it's changed a lot, and I have to be honest, this is why I'm so excited to be connected with Brightwire Leadership, because you're the experts on coaching and on individual development, which fits perfectly into the new world of strategy.
Yeah, that's one of the things I see around strategy, around how nimble you need to be with it and going back to it regularly to adapt to the environment and the changes that are happening so quickly now. But then also the systems that can roll right through the organization, that everybody feels a sense of connection to that strategy. It can't be a distant, up on the wall, only the executives know about it. It really needs to flow throughout the organizations. What have you seen around the things that help make strategy really effective around the world that's changing, and what some of the big changes have been over the last number of years?
I believe the key is how you work with the people in your organization as a CEO. So if you'll continue with the model of the CEO or the C-suite as a brain trust, that has real limitations. And I personally feel it's probably the riskiest model going forward. Now, of course, there's risk if you bring everyone into the organization and into the decision making, because then there's a lot more people who can make a wrong decision.
Yeah.
But it allows you to bring so much more a richer context to problem solving and to understanding where the challenges are, and much better reconnaissance idea of where change is coming, because people on the at different levels of the organization will have a much better sense of what's going on with their customers, what's going on with their competitors. And you want to be able to use technology, use today's systems to be able to bring that in for smarter decision making and better strategy development for the whole organization.
Yeah, so speaking of like methodology around what's changing, what are some of the things that are emerging as good and best practices? Because strategy and leadership aren't new, but kind of how it's adapting now. What are some of the things that you're seeing that are at the forefront of those changes?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it is still a little dynamic. And I think because there's the understanding you have to have some fixes while you're allowing things to be shifting. The model that I think works best is to build that structure, that infrastructure, the core around some key questions. So question number one that I feel it's important for every organization to focus on is, what problem are we trying to solve? And let's even go a little deeper, because if you're trying to solve a problem for yourself, who cares? If you're trying to solve your customer's problem, now you're adding value.
Yeah.
So identify effectively what is the customer problem you're trying to solve. How important is it to them? Because you want to be adding value to them. That's how you keep a business alive. Second question is, why is your organization the one that they should turn to? What do you have that's special, that's unique, or an approach? What makes you a better choice for them? Question number three is, what is the scope that you want to operate within? In other words, what's the geography? What's the horizontal or the different services that you want to offer to each of your customers and clients? And then what's the vertical, like how deep do you want to get in being able to provide those services? And then the last question is, where are you going? Like, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah.
So I find working on those 4 questions and having a consistent approach on all those unifies the organization so that you can then use a coaching model to make sure that you get the best brain power on addressing each of those questions.
Yeah, that's a great comment, because that's kind of really what we deal with, is the tools of our trade are asking good questions. And that's part of what we do at Brightwire, is to help leadership teams, because as you know, they come together. What's the problem we're trying to solve? Well, everybody has different opinions, they have different perspectives, and it's all about how do we help facilitate them to get to a place to distill it down to say, that's the problem. And it's really clear, because if the leadership team, the C-suite, the executives, to the level of clarity that they have is the level of clarity that there can be throughout the organization. And if they're not clear and aligned there, nobody else is going to be clear and aligned. And so that's a lot of what we do around helping facilitate conversations around getting clear on answering those really key questions.
And what I love about the coaching model is to me, like, you're an expert at coaching, I'm not. But what I've seen is it works very hard to eliminate the ego of being involved in something. So you're not expected, in a coaching model, you're not expected to have all the answers. And you don't expect someone else to have all the answers either. It's more, how do you use effective questioning? Well, you can tell me how it works best, but how do you really draw out of people what's their unique understanding and value, and what's important to them?
Well, and where that starts, it is. And where that starts for us is really getting everybody's thoughts and opinions out there. So you need to have some safety and trust in the room to say, let's talk about it, let's get it out there. So the idea is that we're not trying to distill right and wrong from the beginning. We're trying to get people talking about it. Then as you're talking about it, saying, great, now let's start to find where we have things in common and start to distill those down. So in the sense of it's nobody's being muted, everybody's different voices and perspectives are being brought in. And in the end, there's a resounding yes of this is what we're all talking about, because you've just worked hard at helping them distill it down. So there's a sense of everybody's been part of it, and then everybody owns it. So when you move forward, there's a sense of how do we operationalize this and execute on this together.
So in your experience, what are the pros and cons to adopting a coaching model in an organization?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I think it's all about the process to get there. Because what you're really talking about is not what we're going to do, because that's what you spend all your time, but how we're getting there. And so for a coach, it's even acknowledging, like, how are we talking about these things? How are we hearing each other? How are we appreciating the perspectives that people are going? And so there's a little bit of a stepping back, looking at how we work together that allows people to have perspective to say, oh, I see where that perspective's coming from and I can value it. I have a different one, but getting on the same page to appreciate the different strengths and perspectives that people are bringing to the table to get those really working in unison and working in the same direction. And you kind of mentioned earlier about ego and some of those things that come in. You also get those things to be subservient to the greater vision. Now, when you have a clear vision, you say ego, ambition, all of those things are not necessarily bad in themselves. It's a matter of, are they working towards the same end? And that's where the getting really clear and distilling the strategy, say, we put our efforts into really working towards that. And then also all of our people that we're leading as well.
Excellent. Excellent.
One of the questions that came up for me is you talked about what do we want to be when we grow up? That longer term, like 5-10 years out. And I want you to just comment more about that long-term vision in relationship to that shorter vision of the annual plans that we work to operationalize, and the relationship on how those connect with strategy and leadership.
Yeah, fantastic. Because there definitely has to be a connection, but it can change from year to year. In other words, from getting to point A to point B might seem like a straight line, but in all likelihood, it's going to vary along the way in reality. So I think it's really important to identify those short terms and even 5-year steps that will, based on the knowledge you have today, will lead you towards that vision, but also to be astute enough to recognize when it comes to take another look at it, well, maybe, the short term has to be adjusted a bit. So in answer to your question, they're both important.
Yeah.
You need to have that North Star, but you also need to see how you're progressing towards it. It's just that the progressions toward it might be a lot more shifting than the North Star.
Yeah, it's not nearly as straight line as it used to be. And that's the thing, is that you're right, there's this tension between having a longer term vision and being faithful and sticking with it over the long term, even in the midst of difficulties. And then also that ability to adapt in the short term of really big changes that are happening, to say what you thought was relevant 3 years out is no longer relevant. How do you adjust to those things at the same time as well?
Yeah, it can be a failure in the organization, but more often than not, it's changing conditions on the outside.
Yeah.
So there's a new competitor has come in, or there's a new model, a new way of doing things, or society's views have changed on whatever you're offering. So there's so much dynamism in it all.
Yeah.
You can't be too firm. I guess that's probably the one thing that's really important. Don't be too firm on your answers.
Yeah.
And that's where I find the coaching model allows you to bring in more viewpoints and more perspectives in a less ownership-based approach that can come to better answers.
So, to kind of wrap up here, you've spent decades teaching this, living this, leading this. And for those people watching who are business owners, executives in the C-suite leading, what advice do you have for them around just some of the things that you've learned over these years around meeting the future?
Well, I guess my number one advice is be open-minded, and I guess I'd have to say, connect with us. We'll help you in looking at all the options, but not to be totally self-serving. I've found in my career that when you try to do things in a very different way, that you might not get the answers you're looking for, but you're going to get some great answers because good people are hungry for new approaches and new ideas. And I'll just reflect on one experience when I had the opportunity to be CEO of a company called Hopewell, a local real estate developer. And that is where I learned the approach of let's not think about our problems, because there was a lot of discussion in the competition about who can deal with the city approvals better, who can deal with contractors better, on and on. But we went right to the ultimate homeowner and the community, and we focused all of our attention on, we identified what's important to them is how do they celebrate baptism in their house? How do they celebrate somebody's important birthday? How do they celebrate graduation? How do they get to church every day, every Sunday? How do they get their kids to school? And we built everything we did around trying to solve their problems.
Nice.
And I tell you, that company for 5 years, its first 5 years in operation, won the Developer of the Year award. And it was just a really phenomenal experience.
Yeah, that's great advice that you have for business leaders. And one of the things that I think about as a coach is so often we focus on the dashboard, the metrics of performance. And I think that's still important. We don't want to let go of that. But I think as a coach, one thing I'm learning to focus on more is the learning that happens on the way. To not downplay too much about the lessons that are learning, because I think a learning and growing organization is so important for meeting the future that's continually changing. And so, you got to measure the performance and focus on that, but also celebrate and acknowledge that even when you maybe didn't make it, there's something that's been learned. When you do make it, there's been something that's been learned, and focusing on the learning, because that's the thing that positions you really for success in the future.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And in fact, there is a theory, Deliberately Developmental Organizations by Bob Keegan. It's amazing. And his thesis is that people come to organizations to learn. And organizations exist to learn. And the most successful organizations in the world are all taught around learning. And it's a very powerful tool and a very powerful theory, and I'd really support it.
That's so much of what makes work enjoyable. I mean, it's the relationships and the work you do, but it's also the opportunity to grow and stretch and to learn new things that really kind of make it engaging and interesting throughout your months and years serving there.
Yep. One other thing I'll just throw in is, and I know that Brightwire is very committed to this, is the importance of sticking to values within an organization. That's a big part of strategy, a big part of leadership. And for my own experience, as a young leader, CEO in engineering consulting, I had this amazing experience where our company took off the day after we fired one of our clients. So we didn't like what they were asking us to do. We thought it was not quite right.
Yeah.
And I tell you, that spread like wildfire through the industry, and suddenly our phone's ringing off the hook. So if you are really serious about your values as an organization, it can make a big impact on where you go.
Yeah, that's a great story about knowing more about who you are. And sometimes finding out who you are and the learning that happens is in the know. That it really starts to crystallize that because you've said no to this, it's a signal to other people, but also about this is what we really focus on, and the importance of how that makes our values real, to say that's what we're going to pursue. Everybody else takes notice and gets on board with that as well and is excited for it.
Yeah.
All right, well, hey, this has been a great conversation about the future of strategy and leadership, the importance of coaching, having a coach approach to it, and having coaching partners like what Brightwire Leadership brings. And then also the methodology around how strategy and leadership are changing and adapting for the future. What else would you add just in closing words about that?
Well, that's a great summary, and I really appreciate that. And I guess what I would say is what I observe is getting tougher and tougher to make it in business. There's a lot of pressures on business owners, on CEOs, and they need to have the most current tools to be effective. Technology is having a bigger and bigger impact, and competition is fierce. So you have to avail yourself of every support and opportunity you can get. And I'd just be thrilled to be working with more businesses and help them get through this period and be the success that they need to be.
Very exciting future for those meeting the future of business. It can be both scary and daunting, but the opportunities are just, they're all over, and it's amazing how things are changing so quickly.
Exactly.
It's great to be part of it and to be able to help partner with organizations meet the future.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Ed.